Well, for more on the markets, global and local, I'm joined across the way by Chris Gilmore. He's an independent analyst at the JSE. Thanks very much for joining us, Chris. So global markets generally appear to be in positive territory. Apparently, the European markets are particularly raging ahead, not necessarily raging, but doing well on the back of expectations that central banks in the developed world may indeed raise or cut interest rates. But even if they do, what benefit will it be to the European economy, which didn't even really seem to benefit that much from quantitative easing for, 10 years?
Yeah, good afternoon, Nampu. I think you're right. Look, Europe is an interesting demographic. I attended a presentation in London recently when Mohammed El Arayan from PIMCO stroke Allianz. And, he pointed out that you've got this aging demographic in Europe, and he likened it to a football team where 5 of the players are kind of out of action or are not really contributing very much. In other words, he was talking about Germany, the UK with all its Brexit problems, Spain, Italy and France. And you've got major problems in many of these areas. Coupled with which you've got, as I say, this aging demographic. People are not spending as much as they used to. And you've got the so-called baby boomers in the States and in Europe. They're going to go from being net contributors to the system over the next few years to being net takers out of the system. So reducing interest rates, I fear, isn't going to make any difference whatsoever in the developed world and maybe not even in the emerging world either. So the ability of central banks at this point in time to play a pivotal role is probably exhausted.
And then, of course, still sticking with Europe or near Europe, Theresa May, it's her last day in office today. And of course, we look forward to see who's going to win in terms of the contest amongst the Conservatives. What's your anticipation going forward? Are they going to experience a hard Brexit? And is that all, is that all now accounted for in the British pound currently?
I think no matter which way you look at it, any exit of Britain from the UK is going to be a hard divorce. It just depends on how hard it turns out to be. As I've been quoted on a number of occasions, this is one of the most willful acts of self-harm that any country has inflicted upon itself in many, many decades. And you only have to look at what Donald Trump was talking about the other day when he was doing the state visit, saying, well, everything's up for discussion, even including the National Health Service. Well, I think that, if anything, was calculated to get the ire of the population. I mean, tampering with their beloved National Health System really is very, very stupid. And I think that must have been music to the ears of the Remainers, because that will not help. Theresa May's legacy is an appalling one. In her few years in power, she didn't manage to deliver a Brexit, and she got herself entangled in an awful mess. She started off the negotiations by painting herself into a corner, so to speak, with her insistence on not remaining in the single market, not having a customs union. In other words, pandering to the very right of the Conservative Party. And as a result, the Europeans understandably took a very hard-to-cut approach. And that's why you ended up in the stalemate. And I very much doubt whether the stalemate will, in fact, be resolved by the 31st of October. Who is going to take over from Theresa May? Well, the front runner is Boris Johnson. Interestingly enough, if you look at previous Conservative Party contests for the leadership, the front runner has rarely, if ever, won. He is known as being a hard Brexiteer, although I think if you look at his track record, Boris is one of these people who kind of looks at which way the wind is blowing. And if he gets the impression that things are changing and that the mood in the country is changing away from being in favour of a Brexit to something that more resembles staying in the European Union, nothing would surprise me. He could very, very easily change course and say, follow me, guys. So the Conservative Party is in complete disarray. The Labour Party, the main opposition, is in equal disarray, I would argue. Never have I seen British politics in such an awful, awful, unmitigated mess. And I don't know what the end result is going to be. I think it's going to be dominated by Brexit over the next few months. But I sincerely doubt that a deal will be reached by the 31st of October.
Chris, coming to Africa now, to us here in South Africa, Moody's just warning that we do run a serious risk of going into recession. What are your thoughts on this, and what are your thoughts around the data that came out in terms of our economy contracting by 3.2% in the first quarter, and also the negative current account deficit, which widened to 2.9% of GDP? And also the move towards expanding the economy and growing the economy, the efforts being made by President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Look, yeah, a number of questions in there, Nompu. Bear in mind that the first quarter GDP took, I think, most people by surprise, the extent of it. I think everyone was looking for a negative figure, but the 3.2% quarter on quarter surprised a lot of people. The very fact that this quarter, the first quarter, was so deep in negative territory probably means that in the second quarter it's unlikely to repeat that unless you get a lot of power outages, and here we are in June and there haven't really been any. So I think the likelihood is that there'll be a recovery in the second quarter which will result in there not physically being a recession. To your second point about how do you get the growth, well, this has been very elusive for quite some time, and it has been very, very difficult for people in government and elsewhere to really come to any kind of definitive agreement as to how South Africa goes forward. A number of things I think have to happen. You have to have getting rid of a lot of red tape. You probably have to indulge in activities that are going to mop up a lot of people, because our unemployment rate, the official rate, the expanded version at 38%, is entirely unacceptable. So anything that actually moves that needle down would be most welcome.
Yeah.
The problem is, when you've only got 1% growth or thereabouts, you're physically destroying jobs in the process. So it's a bit of a catch-22, unfortunately.
Chris?
And I think really to your last point, if I heard you correctly, I think what we need to see coming out of government is a unified message. At this point in time, we cannot afford the luxury of Cyril Ramaphosa and Ace Magashule having public spats. And I know the president tried to diffuse the situation last night with the paper that he put round. But as we see this morning, the rand continues to plummet. And that is, as you pointed out earlier in your narrative, this is peculiar to South Africa. Emerging market currencies across the board, they might be a little bit weak, but nothing like this.
Yeah.
So this is definitely specific to South Africa. And I think it's incumbent upon the major players there to really get their act together and work in the interest of the country and stop having these public spats.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you very much for your time and insights, as always. Chris Gilmore, he's an independent analyst, just giving us his take on the markets. Well, in a moment, we can expect your money. My colleague Diabo Sito has been doing a fantastic job speaking to different entrepreneurs who are trying to break through and get their stuff going. What can we expect after the break?
Hi, Nobu. You know that your money on market sense absolutely excites me. And this week, we'll be taking a look at personal finance matters. We'll be looking at higher purchase or installment agreements. You know that sometimes you have a clothing account, sometimes you have a big ticket item such as furniture, and you take it on installment. What does this mean? Do you really have to do it? Do you understand what the terms and agreements are? Our specialist reporter, Naledi Matlapeng, actually has a brilliant insert on that, and we'll be talking more about that after this.
We look forward to it. Well, we can expect an interesting Your Money on Market Sense after a break.